This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host G. Sampath. A new paper released by the Niti Aayog has claimed that multidimensional poverty or MDI in India has declined from 29.17% in 2013-14 to 11.28% in 2022-23. And it has also said that 24.82 crore people have quote unquote escaped from multidimensional poverty during this 9-year period, which is also roughly the decade the Narendra Modi government has been in power. Titled Multidimensional Poverty in India since 2005-06, a discussion paper, this Niti Aayog report also claims that India is well on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal SDG 1.2 of halving multidimensional poverty by 2030. The report also claims that various government initiatives such as Poshan Abhiyan, Anaemia, Mukt, Bharat, and Ujjwala Yojana have played a critical role in mitigating different forms of deprivation. Now, on the face of it, India managing to reduce its poverty headcount is no doubt a great achievement. But at the same time, development economists have been complaining bitterly about the increasing difficulty in accessing relevant data. So, are these claims in this report based on hard data or are they projections? Does a reduction in multidimensional poverty headcount actually mean a reduction in poverty itself? And how do these claims square with India's worsening rank, for instance, in the Global Hunger Index? We discuss all this and more in this episode, and we have with us the economist Arun Kumar, who is the Malcolm Adi Seshaya Chair Professor at the Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. Professor Kumar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sampath, for having me.
Professor Kumar, to start with, can you please explain for the benefit of our listeners what exactly is multidimensional poverty as a metric or a measure, and how is it different from what we traditionally understand when someone talks about a growth or a decrease in poverty levels in our country?
So, Sampath, growth is about the increase of the total income of the economy. It is not about what each individual is earning. And therefore, the distribution of the income matters, and those who are at the bottom, their incomes are very low, and that's why they're said to be poor. So in India, we have extreme disparity where we have the third largest number of billionaires in the world at a per capita income, which is 137th in the world. So in per capita incomes, it's very low. And because there are such a large number of billionaires earning, lots and lots of money every year, people at the bottom are earning very little. So the e-Shram portal data, and the Prime Minister said 30 crores are registered there, that shows that 94% say that they are earning less than 10,000 rupees per month per person. Now, given that, the World Bank poverty line now is $2.15 per person per day, it suggests that, an average family needs 26,500 rupees per month. Now, that's supposed to be in PPP terms. Even if we divide it by 2.5 or 3, we still have, 9,500 rupees for a family of 5 for poverty line. And people are saying that 94% people in the 30 crore, registered on the e-Shram portal, they're saying they're earning less than 10,000 rupees. So it means that, there's a large amount of people who are poor by that criteria, by the World Bank criteria, okay? So decrease in poverty will mean not just income rising, but it will mean the well-being of the individuals in society to rise, especially those who are poor, those who are at the bottom 90% of the society. So how do we define poverty? That becomes an important question. And we define poverty typically as what is the socially necessary minimum consumption. And this socially necessary minimum consumption keeps changing with time and space. So for instance, in somebody living in Ladakh would need good clothing, good housing, good energy, good food, to be able to survive a winter there. which is actually what a middle class family will get in the plains, or in Tamil Nadu, maybe, it's easy to survive, with very little, because the climate is warm. You don't need very good clothing, very good housing, etc., etc. So poverty is, if it is defined as socially minimum necessary consumption, then it is space specific and time specific. As times change, as society changes, the poverty line also changes. So we are, chasing a moving target. It is not that we fixed something in 1962 or fixed something in 1993 or in 2012, and that will apply also in 2023. So what we have seen is that in India itself, we have been having a change in the definition of poverty, where we earlier used to think of a calorific norm. And it was said in 1962 that we don't need to include education and health because the state will provide that, but that never happened. So therefore, the wider definition of consumption came in the 90s, and then the Human Development Index, which was proposed by Amartya Sen, which included more than income and consumption. It included slightly more of consumption of other things. And then came the multidimensional poverty, which is what we are using in India. Now, the multidimensional poverty consists of three major components. One is education, the other is health, and the third is the standard of living. Each of these things has 1/3 weight in the basket that is there. Now, in a health dimension, we include nutrition and child and adolescent, then mortality indicators, and in education dimensions include, years of schooling and school attendance indicators. Standard of living dimension includes household specific indicators like housing, household assets, type of cooking fuel, access to sanitation, drinking water, electricity. So if a person is deprived in at least 1/3 of these indicators, then we say that the person is poor. So multidimensionally a poor individual is suffering from deprivation on 1/3 of these indicators that are used. So this index that is created is a product of, say, the deprivation, the percentage of the population that is deprived, in terms of these indicators, multiplied by the extent of, the deprivation. So in a sense, it's a bit complicated, but what it is trying to do is it's saying that it's not just income poverty that we are capturing, but we are capturing more, the other requirements of the individual are also getting captured. And then how much of that deprivation is there. So these two factors together are what is there in the multidimensional poverty index. So there's multidimensional poverty, and then the index is created on the basis of the headcount and so on that is there. So it's slightly complicated, but the problem that arises with this definition is that it is based on certain inputs rather than the outcomes, And so, we can claim that if the input is there, whether the outcome is there or not, we can claim that, multidimensional poverty has come down. So the people have been critical, like Santosh Mehrotra has written recently on this, that how this is not an appropriate measure. And the headcount, the Human Development Index may be a better indicator than this multidimensional poverty thing. But in my judgment, actually, even more than that, what we have to do as a nation, define what is a living wage, because that's what the Constitution promises. And if somebody doesn't have a living wage, then the person is poor. So this living wage means you should have good education, good health, good nutrition, good housing, good clothing, etc. So in a sense, multidimensional poverty tries to capture some of that, but it's from the input side, but not from the outcome side. Whereas we need to see the outcome, because very often the government programs are not able to successfully reach everybody. And it is simply taken that if we say that we have given cooking gas cylinders to everybody, then everybody has cooking gas cylinders, whereas actually people may not be using the cooking gas cylinders. Similarly, when we talk about enrollment in schools, then, we may have enrollment, but children may not be able to go to school because of a variety of things. So we don't have the outcome. We know that we have the input. And that's why the government, is using this multidimensional poverty to basically claim that poverty has declined.
Right. Thank you so much for the detailed explanation, Professor Kumar. That it really is a complicated kind of a term, and you've done a great job of explaining it. I was just curious if you can, you were talking about the difference between, measuring inputs and measuring outcomes. So I was just wondering, if government can say we have given so many inputs in terms of this, that, and all that, and then claim that there is a reduction. So, so put it differently, is it possible to have a reduction in multidimensional poverty headcount, so to speak, and at the same time no real reduction in poverty, as for example you would understand it in terms of a living wage or purchasing power or consumption expenditure?
So yes, as we were discussing, you could have a reduction in multidimensional poverty, but in actual practice, the poverty may not decline. And this is the case with the current report also. But because, for instance, what is being done is that the National Health and Family Survey data, which is done every few years, it was done in 2015-16, and that is compared to the next round of National Health and Family Survey done in 2019 to 21. Now note, 1 year of survey of 2015-16 is being compared to 2 years of the survey of 2019-21. This is very peculiar because it includes 2020-21, which was a year when the economy received a shock of the pandemic. So the data for 2019-20 and 2020-21 should not be averaged out as it has been done in the report. So that creates a flaw. And then further, what is being done is from 2020-21, it is projected to 2022-23. Now that's another flaw, because when the data itself is flawed in 2020-21, then how can you project it, to the next year and the next year, because that will create errors. So therefore, basically what I have argued is that the data itself is incorrect. And if the data is incorrect, then the poverty will not get captured. Okay. So even though multidimensional poverty index, because it's based on inputs, that may show that things are better, because you say that you've given more of cylinders, you've got more enrollment in schools, you've got more health centers. But during the pandemic, we found that all of these had a problem. So projection of inputs doesn't mean that the outcomes are there. Secondly, the census is the basis on which you do the sampling. And if the sampling is not correct, then then the results will also be incorrect. So we are using the 2011 census because the 2021 census has not been done. And there has been a huge change between 2011 and 2021. So we are reliant on the 2011 census, which doesn't represent what is happening in 2021, 22, 23. So therefore, we need to be careful about that. And especially the 2020-21, the unorganized sector got hit very hard. And the unorganized sector has 94% of the employment. Now, if they got hit very hard and their data is not captured in our national account statistics, it's not captured in other things, then it means that our data is incorrect. And if the data is incorrect, then you can say that, okay, our multidimensional poverty has gone down, whereas in reality it hasn't, because the pandemic hit the health sectors and education sectors very hard, and that is not being captured in the input data. For instance, we know that there were a lot of deaths which went unrecorded. We also know that people could not get hospitals or dispensaries because they didn't exist where they were there on paper. So showing that the inputs don't lead to the output. Similarly, in the education sector, we know schools were closed, children were not going to class, etc. They were sitting at home and they had to focus on a small screen for hours, which is impossible. So we are not looking at the education outcome also. And similarly, because the income declined, especially in the unorganized sector, the well-being was not better, well-being declined. So therefore, we can see that this data which is being used will not give the correct outcome. And therefore, even though the data on multidimensional poverty may show that multidimensional poverty is decreased, actually the problem is that poverty may be increasing. And just today I saw the ACER report. And the ACER report shows that how 50% of children in the age group of 14 to 18, those who are about to enter the job market, they cannot do maths, they cannot do proper language skills, etc. So therefore, in a sense, even though you may say that so many children are enrolled, okay, but what is the outcome? The outcome is very poor. And that outcome, we know in the case of education, not only in India, but even in the US, which is well endowed, there the math skills decline, the cognitive skills decline because children weren't going to schools, etc. So that kind of decline was much sharper in India. And that is not captured. So the outcome is not captured.
Right. Professor Kumar, sorry to interrupt you. Just to come back on this data question, Well, I was just going through the report and the discussion paper, and it speaks of interpolation and extrapolation in arriving at its figures. The two main years it's talking about. The comparison 2013-14 to 2022-2023. Now, neither for 2013-14 nor for 2022-23 is it depending on directly on any data. I mean, 2013-14 figures or projections is what I can make out. And 2022-23 is also some kind of a projection, which is what this interpolation, extrapolation means to a lay person like me. So are they really speculative estimates? Can you please throw some light on this interpolation, extrapolation business?
Yeah, so it's not speculative. Speculative means that you just cook up some figures, huh? They say that they have a basis, है? So what is the basis? The basis is that the year that is prior to 2015-16, where the National Health and Family Survey was done, you are using a compound rate of growth to figure out what had happened in the year preceding that. Okay. Because you want to make a comparison of that year with the end point of the current regime. Okay, so that's why it's being done. Now, that is a legitimate thing to do some kind of interpolation between the 2 years that for which you have the data. Okay, it's legitimate because you have no other way of doing it. Now, the projection that is being done from 2021 to 2022, 2023, that is where the problem arises. Because when you do extrapolations have to have a basis. Extrapolations have to be on the basis of some kind of regularity in the data. But we know that 2021 and 21-22 were pandemic years when production suffered, income suffered, health outcomes suffered, the education outcomes suffered. You cannot then do the projection. So the basis for projecting from 2021 to 22-23, that is incorrect. But the interpolation that could be done for the starting year, that is legitimate because there was no shock. But if you try to project from 2015-16 to 2016-17, when the demonetization was done, that would be incorrect. Because the demonetization produced a shock in the economy and changed the parameters. So as long as the parameters don't change, you can do extrapolation and interpolation. But when the parameters change, then you cannot do that. And that's where I think the problem lies.
Right. One other question with regard to the process and the method here, Professor Kumar. Now, we know that the global multidimensional poverty index uses 10 indicators, but the Niti Aayog has added 2 more indicators, maternal health and bank accounts. I was just wondering, what is the logic in including bank accounts to a poverty index? Because a person can have a bank account and have no money in it, right? So how does this become a factor in this? I mean, what is the logic here?
The government is looking for presenting a good image of itself. And therefore, by including extra variables more than what the world uses 10, we are now using 12. Clearly, after the Jan Dhan accounts were opened, a lot of people had bank accounts. So therefore, this would give an upward bias to the reduction of poverty, and that's what the government is trying to aim for. So we all know that large number of these Jan Dhan accounts had zero balance because the poor are not expected to save. Poor are deprived in terms of the basics. Now, when they're deprived in terms of the basics, they are not going to be saving, and therefore their accounts will not have money. So, in fact, I wrote an article at that time saying that those who are actually putting their money in may be actually fictitious accounts opened by the better off people and who are putting their money. And we saw that during the demonetization, about 70,000 crores of money was put in. Now, the poor don't have 70,000 crores to put in there because they are actually deprived of basics. So that was the money coming from the others. So that shows that many of these Jan Dhan accounts either have zero balances or are fake accounts opened by other people. And therefore, it just gives an upward bias in terms of the reduction of poverty. So this kind of thing is a play with the data to try and show better results. So that's why I think these 2 indicators were used.
Right, an upward bias in terms of helping with the image. Okay, moving on, Professor Kumar. The report also claims that the states which saw the biggest declines in multidimensional poverty are Uttar Pradesh and Bihar and Madhya Pradesh too. The so-called Bimaru states, which have traditionally been witness to a lot of deprivation. Now, how does this claim of such a sharp fall in multidimensional poverty in these three states like correlate with other indirect indicators, for instance, like distress migration and so on and so forth?
So you're absolutely right. When we use the input indicators rather than the outcomes, then it is these poorer states that will show a big fall in poverty, because your schemes will claim that you have done this, you have done that, that you have enrolled students in the schools, that you've opened dispensaries, and you've got various things. But the problem is that the outcomes are what we need to see. So when you say that distress migration is continuing and it still remains very large, that is an outcome. So that's an outcome of continuing poverty. But the multidimensional poverty index will not look at that. So therefore, especially for the poorer states, you'll claim a big fall in poverty, because that's the way the method is devised. So the problem really is that our data itself is incorrect. The variables that we are looking at, those are incorrect. For instance, demonetization hit the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector lost incomes. Then the GST hit the unorganized sector. Then again, they lost incomes. And it is these poorer states where the unorganized sector is very large. It is the richer states where the organized sector is larger. So when the unorganized sector declines, then what happens is that, the poverty would be higher. And when the unorganized sector declines, then the unemployment will be high. Now, unemployment should have been an indicator, but unemployment is not being taken as an indicator in this multidimensional poverty index. So the big thing that would represent, because if you don't have employment, then you don't have income. And we have shown in our report that there are four kinds of unemployment. You are looking for work and not finding work. You may be in agriculture and there may be disguised unemployment. Then there's underemployment because you're not getting adequate number of hours of work per week. And then there are those who've just left the job market. They're not even looking for work. So these four kinds of unemployment are huge. And that is not captured. And that's what the poverty is a result of. So if you don't capture the real variables which are actually going to reflect the poverty, then you'll have fictitious figures in a sense of reduction of poverty. And that will be the biggest in the poorest states, because that is where unemployment is high. That's why there's distress migration. That's where the incomes are low. That's why you have distress migration. So all the things, the outcomes, for that, this multidimensional poverty index is inadequate to capture.
Right. I mean, when we spoke of distress migration, there is another indirect indicator possibly of how we are doing in terms of poverty is the global hunger index, where again India's rank has been going down. So I was just wondering, Professor Kumar, before we wrap up, one last question for you. The report also concludes on a very optimistic note that India is ahead of the curve, well on track when it comes to meeting the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 1.2 of halving multidimensional poverty in India by 2030. I mean, it says that we might reach that target well in advance. So, are we on track to reach that goal?
Well, from what we have been discussing, if our data is incorrect and if the unorganized sector data is not captured, and I have been arguing that our rate of growth of the economy is not 7% as the government claims. That is the rate of growth of the organized sector. The unorganized sector is unambiguously declining. For instance, you see in the trade sector, e-commerce is rising, malls are rising, and therefore the neighborhood stores are going down. And that's the second largest employer. In agriculture, you have more and more mechanization, so more harvester combines, more tractors, etc. And that's why disguised unemployment in agriculture is rising, and people income from agriculture is not rising, in real terms. So the big, micro sector, there also there's a decline, because you have reports from various things like textile, from leather goods sector, from FMCG sector, etc. That the share of the organized sector is rising, the share of the unorganized sector is decreasing. So you have all these reports of the decline in the unorganized sector, which are not captured in our data, which are not captured in our national income. That's why I keep arguing that we are not growing at 7%, but we are growing at barely maybe 1 or 2%. So if that is the case, then our data is incorrect. And if the data is incorrect, on the basis of incorrect data, you can say that we'll meet the SDG goals, of having multidimensional poverty by 2030. But if you look at the ground situation, the way the unemployment situation is, and the youth, high degree of unemployment, and especially women, so the labor force participation rate for women is abysmally low in India. It has gone up recently, but again, I doubt that it has really gone up that much. Youth, the more educated you are in the age group of 15 to 29, more is the unemployment. Now, these are all pointing to how the poverty is persisting in spite of what multidimensional poverty index may be saying and whatever the government may be saying. So I think we have to really move away from this multidimensional poverty index to looking at the outcomes, not the inputs. Once we do that, then we'll realize what the real situation is. But it's this multidimensional poverty index is coming in handy for the government to make claims which are not actually the correct description of the economy.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Kumar, for explaining the various aspects of this report. I mean, two major takeaways for me. One, of course, the data is not exactly correct. And secondly, any kind of an attempt to measure poverty should be focusing on outcomes rather than inputs. And that is not the case with this report. And I think there is a lot of problematic elements to this. Thank you so much once again for joining us and for sharing your observations and insights on this topic. Thank you so much, Professor Kumar.
Thanks a lot for having me. Thank you.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.